Elements of self. A friend posted a link to 40 psychopath facts that will give you the creeps, with this comment. This was interesting in that all 40 can pertain to someone. I know, quite startling. However, there's one very important factor. The behavior is not deliberate, it's largely inadvertent, and that makes a huge difference. That's the saving grace. Legacy superiority distortions. It set me to thinking. I would say we all have elements of the psychopath in us. It's the ego aspect, subpersonality. That part of us which is predicated on the superiority paradigm and fixated on self-promotion and appearing better, gaining approval, etc. This aspect of self cares only about relative superiority and has no absolute standards. Thus no morality or ethics. Doing whatever's necessary to obtain its goals and objectives. The degree to which this aspect of self or subpersonality is developed and utilized determines how much of the psychopath we have in us. If this aspect of self becomes the main and dominant personality, we have a full-blown psychopath, the kind which becomes a serial killer or other forms of criminality. However, it's a matter of degree. Understanding there can be aspects of self, or subpersonalities, psychological software, which thinks and behaves in psychopathic terms, is crucial to the understanding of self. A legacy program from our ancestral times when personal physical survival was the most predominant aspect and focus of our being. Physical superiority was thus a critical issue and extremely important. Over time, as the physical survival superiority no longer became the predominant factor, the superiority shifted to status and self-importance, to all the nonsense of ego. The lack of morality and ethics of this aspect of self, of this psychological perspective, stems from the absolutism of the physical survival paradigm. When it's kill or be killed, there's no room for any other perspectives. It's an absolute circumstance, where ethics and morality are not a factor. The more of collaboration. But we do evolve, we can evolve. We have evolved. We possess the ability to evolve deliberately, able to move beyond these primitive mindsets and paradigms. Especially when we understand community is way more effective as a survival organism and we realize individual personal survival is no longer the most important standard. It's been superseded by the community paradigm. Purely physical survival is also no longer the primary issue. What's the point of physical existence only without spiritual development? There's more to life. Much more than mere physical survival. Once we become aware of them more, the onus is on us to move away from legacy primitive paradigms. As individuals, we need to get with the program of personal evolution. We can utilize the benefit of community to enhance our individuality, to evolve, to learn and grow, to contribute via this to the whole, and to ourselves. By aligning ourselves to the overall paradigms, we can transcend the restrictions of the severely limited and narrow perspectives inherent in the primitive physical survival psychology. Psychopaths and those who embrace ego and the superiority paradigm in its varying degrees need to grow up, for heaven's sake. Living one's life continuously in fear is so petty and foolish, achieving nothing. We can do better. The rainbow choices of difference. Distorted psychologies are typically dominated by fear of relative inferiority or supposed relative lack of status and all the related imagined dreads. Sensibility regarding our physical security does not have to involve fear. Simply strategic prudence. This fear of being lesser is an absurd perspective when applied psychologically, as it completely ignores the reality of difference. It's like saying one color is superior to another, simply nonsensical. As people, as psychologies, as personalities, we are the colors and shades of this marvelous rainbow called life. What hue and tint we choose to be as a person is determined by how much effort we are willing to make for the rewards those efforts bring. How much reward is worth the effort depends entirely on the individual. There's no better or worse when it comes to the circle of effort-reward. It's an entirely individual choice and no one can say there's any better or worse choice for another. Only the individual can determine what's worth the effort to them. Thus there can be no better or worse when it comes to personhood. We might believe so because we choose to buy into the superiority paradigm, but in actuality any improvements are offset by the effort costs involved. Where we are as individuals is always a trade-off, always an individual choice. This is the glory of difference. Should dominance. If we look internally, and look at how much of the psychopath is in us, we are actually determining how much we ascribe to the superiority paradigm. How much we have been fooled and seduced by its false song. We can break free from this absurd psychology, especially when we connect it to that subtle but oh so powerful evil of should. These subtle implied and inadvertently assimilated shoulds coerce us into believing we should seek superiority, we should be relatively better than, we should seek status and self-importance, and we should at all costs seek to be relatively superior to at least one other, so we aren't at the bottom of the pecking order. This is all fine and well if one wants to live like a chicken. But as humans we have other options. Many other options of being. Our happiness, survival, individuality and way of being are most absolutely not predicated on any relative comparison to others. Simply look around at those who are happy, joyful, content, at ease with themselves and the world, and invariably, if it's true happiness and joy, one will find a free and individual independent person. Someone who's unhooked from the incessant pressures of the superiority paradigm. Those who wish to escape the pecking order by being the apex don't realize cock of the walk or top dog carries its own share of stress and risk. It's simply a different stress and risk. The way to eliminate the hassles of pecking order is to simply not be part of that system at all. We can be true and free individuals. We do not have to buy into that pecking order, regardless of what others may want to do. As humans we have evolved. Physical pecking is no longer a part of our society and is in fact illegal. The only pecking which can occur is psychological. When it comes to psychological influence ourselves, we have full and complete control over what we allow. Of course we might have to make a bit of effort to actualize this freedom and control. But that's really all we need to do, realize it is an option for us. Then all we need do is go about exercising our option to be free, independent, and individual. Self-elements. Part of this understanding, this realization, this knowing of self, is being aware that I is more than one. Knowing and understanding the self is composed of parts is essential. We have to have at least two in order to be aware of ourselves. Those parts, or aspects, personality and character aspects, are for the most part leftover self-development programs. From selves which prove to be unsustainable or unworkable. These leftover aspects are like unfinished software programs, abandoned because they prove to be deficient in some way. Or they are specialist psychologies which only work and function in very specific circumstances. Being aware we are thus comprised of different parts, different selves, which, due to circumstances we could become immersed in, greatly enhances our abilities to deal with ourselves. For instance, the personality aspect that likes order and organization. It's prevalent to varying degrees and usually manifests in the more extreme as the neat freak or superanal personality, or when it takes over and becomes permanent and predominant it can manifest as obsessive compulsion and similar, but in moderation it's useful and valuable. Likewise, we need to understand that the psychopath aspect, the psychopath personality aspect is also in us there somewhere. It's commonly referred to as the ego. How much or how little we immerse in the ego determines how much of a psychopath we are. Psychopathic behavior does not necessarily entail extremes like murder or torture and the like. It's simply at base, the absence of scruples, ethics, morals, principles and other behavioral standards. Psychopathic behavior is when the behavior is directed by goals without regard for anyone else or any standards, particularly, goals of self-satisfaction and indulgence. And of course goals which are outside of the boundaries of communally beneficial activities. Psychopathic goals are goals benefiting the individual at the expense of others and the community. Bullying is a very typical manifestation of psychopathic psychology. This is how I perceive it. The paradox of selfish. Bullying is of course not confined to physical acts. The most insidious variation of bullying is that which we perpetrate on ourselves. By allowing influence and by taking on the various pressures of should. We only think we need to bow to the pressures of others and of society, but of course this is a myth. There's absolutely no need to do so. We can be individuals and live psychologically independent lives. We simply have to overcome the idea that it's problematic. Once we break free of this notion, this inaccurate conception, we realize how easy it truly is to be a free individual, one true to themselves and true to real values, ethics and integrity. Someone who has real character and actual substance of being. The psychopathic personality might believe it's acting freely, it's after all, satisfying its own desires, and doesn't care about others. But this is of course a massively short-sighted perspective. Selfishness, in the classic definition of the word, is really short-sightedness. The overall, entire long-term self does not overall benefit from what is typically regarded as selfish behavior, but benefits to all of humanity, to all of the world, also benefit the individual. Having standards, scruples, morals, ethics, principles, having regard for others, having consideration, and having an understanding of the value of interaction via cooperation and community is profoundly beneficial to the individual and thus really selfish in the long run if we look at it that way. Without those qualities, functioning is indeed a problematic exercise of living. It's this understanding that the primitive, childish and unsophisticatedly idiotic psychopathic psychology does not understand. It just doesn't get the logic that benefiting others benefits self. It doesn't get the fundamentally profoundly significant concept of integrity. It refuses to consider the responsibility of ethics. The psychopathic psychology is a profoundly self-indulgent psychology. The psychopath mindset, or the psychology of ego, is an extremely myopic and limited awareness worldview. It can't see much further than its immediate wants and desires, and thus loses out massively in the long run. It believes, even in the less severe forms of the psychology, that putting one over others, or getting the best of another, or coming out on top, are all highly desirable. It doesn't realize the longer-term limitations of its abusive behaviors. Because of this immersion into the desires and ambitions of self, there's a lack of perspective, a lack of awareness as to what's truly going on. Bubble mindset. Self-absorbed selfishness is truly the psychology of the bubble. And at the ordinary levels which we encounter the psychopathic personality, what we typically know as the ego, or ego personality, we see this bubble awareness. Ego, self-importance, vanity and so on are all manifestations of this psychology. And if we look closely, there's inevitably the same factor present in all of them, the belief that their doings are private and hidden. When in actuality this isn't so at all. It's a massive myth of indulgence. In reality, the shenanigans, lies, abuses, cheating, scheming and other distortions are obvious to many. Only those caught in similar bubbles might not see this egregious behavior. Even then, most recognize those similar to them, but choose not to acknowledge. What makes the psychopathic, or ego psychology think it gets away with its abuses is the fact that for most sensible people with ethics and standards and integrity, they simply choose not to interact with the ego personalities. They stay away from the psychopathic no matter how little the manifestation. When they do have to interact, they simply ignore or work around the foolishness and unethical behavior. It's much easier and less problematic than calling out the idiocies. When one is dealing with this kind of ego perspective, it's much simpler to simply find ways of minimizing the interaction than it is to confront. Besides, what others choose to do is their business. It's not for us to go around commenting on the behavior of others. Unless it directly affects us, it's none of our business. When it does directly affect us we can say or do something, otherwise it's problematic. Most of the time the questionable behavior is just that, questionable. It's squirrely, skirting the edges of decency and is seldom outright criminal. This is in the typical manifestation of the psychopathic psychology in its non-criminal variation, keeping close to that edge. Maintaining an appearance of decency and legitimacy is how this psychology gets by. Worst of all, it fools itself into believing no one knows what it is. But of course many know, if not most. They simply choose not to get involved and leave these people to their own doings. It's a sad business. This psychology at most of its various levels and manifestations is a lonely existence. It's one of perpetual self-delusion and self-justification. And all because of the adherence to the myth of the desirability of superiority. It's a desperation really. Hard looks. The thing is to recognize this aspect within ourselves. To look beyond its short-sighted calls to immediate gratification and shortcuts. When we look past the petty and trivial benefits this aspect promises, we realize its puerile sensibility. What makes it so incredibly idiotic is the sheer unnecessariness of this mindset. It's all based on the fear of inadequacy. The belief that being simple and basic and uncomplicated, being genuine and acting with integrity is not enough. When of course it's way more than sufficient. It's a massive falsehood that's sadly self-perpetuated. This idea one has to cheat and lie and pretend in order to get ahead. Utterly untrue of course. Sadly the minimal measures of success attained by the abusive individual cultivates and entrenches the belief their way of being is valid. Doesn't seem to matter that as time goes by there's no further value, no grand payoff and wonderful success, but yet the habits of the psychopathic psychology have become entrenched. It's a disastrously sad and terrible trap. All for what? Nothing really. Feeble gains, dearly paid for with a stress-filled empty life. It makes one think, and stop and pause, and consider. Where is it we cross the line? How is it we sell our souls one tiny piece at a time? And for what? For a bit of approval from someone else? A meaningless and temporary palliative for a distorted belief. A belief and idea acquired from those who seek to justify, condone, and sell their own psychopathic psychologies. This is the great evil of should. That we engage in ridiculous behavior simply because it is part of commonly accepted norms. If we look back in history to what was commonly accepted behavior, we are horrified. And we should be no less horrified at our own complicity in this crime of conformity. It's a potent reminder to live with deliberate, conscious choice, attention, and awareness. Otherwise we partake in the perpetuation of a broken culture and paradigm. Tiny acts of courage. All we really have to do is have that small bit of courage to take that first step on the path to independence. It is so little and yet for some so unnecessarily far away. What a tragedy. The ego personality, the vain, the approval seekers and panderers, the self-important, all these variants of the psychopathic psychology dwell in the bubble of belief that their crappy behaviors are somehow beneficial to them. When the awful truth is that of course it's not. Incredibly, the bubbles they live in prevent them from becoming aware of just exactly how ludicrous their behavior really is. If they were to see themselves as others do, they would be horrified. It's the nascent awareness of this terrifying truth which keeps them mired in their folly. At some point in our lives we have to acknowledge what utter idiots we've been. It's then that we cross the threshold and start to truly live. Live real lives. Lives built on integrity, on true and real choices. Choices we make because we want to, not because we are supposed to or we should. All it needs is a bit of trust in ourselves. Trust that we can learn. Trust that if we make the effort we can figure things out. Trust that if we're real and true, things can, will, and do, work out. Trust that no matter what, sacrificing ourselves to the folly of psychopathy is not at all worth it. Trust and insistence that integrity and genuineness is enough. And, of course, they are. Because when we live real lives, lives comprised of our own choices, then it's easy to be happy, joyful and fulfilled, regardless of the circumstances we may find ourselves in. When we realize what makes us happy is who and what we are, not what we have accomplished or attained. Happiness is of course internally determined, not externally. Happiness and satisfaction determined or derived from outside of the self is the myth of the psychopath. What we can do as individuals is to be true to ourselves, whatever that may be. What makes ourself valuable to us is that it's real. It's the only thing that's truly real, that which we choose by ourselves. This is why the distorted ego self and all its derivatives are doomed to unhappiness. Nothing is real in that existence. We have to be extremely careful of adopting that mindset even for the briefest of moments. Selling one's soul is a costly business indeed. Each time we sacrifice our integrity it's like making a little hole in the hull of our lives. That ship becomes more and more waterlogged and eventually flounders before sinking. No thanks, not for me. That's a price way too high to pay. And for what? A bit of praise and approval. A bit of a shortcut here and there. And even if there's some sort of major gain, at what price? Living a perpetual lie. Sacrificing the long term for the short term. Not for me. But this is exactly the fallacy the psychopathic psychology is deluded with. It's monumentally sad and tragic. We can easily fall prey to the belief that we have nothing, when in actuality, if we have lived with integrity, we have plenty. Even if we have not, we can change, and become real, and have plenty. It doesn't take much. Just a simple uncompromising honesty and a willingness to deal with the awful truth. It's never too late. Because we live in the now, not in the past or the future. Nobilia.org Self-Discovery Project. #should #awful truth #difference #effort reward #ego #independence of being #integrity #psychopath psychology #self-importance #superiority paradigm